Hello everybody. Today's video is basically just a compilation of both times that I have talked about hybrid characters in Star Rail. This first video came out when I was under 5,000 subscribers, I believe, and nowadays I have 15,000, which, by the way, thank you all very much for that. This is just an easy way for people who have not watched the first video to watch the first video, and people who haven't watched the second video to watch the second video. Also, people don't really like playlists on YouTube, so this just felt like the better alternative. With that said, hope you guys enjoy. So, I think we can all agree, Star Rail has a lot of characters who are designed very well. They range wildly in how good they are, but there is a clear design philosophy with just about every character who comes out. Herta was meant to be a follow-up character. Rappa is meant to be a break character. And Arlen is meant to be shit. However, rules are meant to be broken. And whether it be the actual character designers or overly curious fans, some characters break out of the mold they were initially set in. This is how we land on hybrid characters. Characters who either combine two design styles into something new, or characters who are capable of playing a different style than they were initially made for. Today, I want to talk about Linkshah, the IPC characters who are the classic hybrid characters, Zhuyi, and the confusing case of Welt and Himiko, who have both found partial new life in the game in wildly different ways. You ready? Let's begin. Hey, if you haven't, subscribe. Yeah! Alright, so this is actually being added in because it's something a lot of people wanted me to touch on in the Building Every Teams video, so we're gonna finally get to it today. We have to talk about Linkshah, and the pure insanity she is capable of. I mean this with no exaggeration. This is a healer capable of being your primary DPS. Not only is she capable, but she is incredible at it. And no, it still doesn't make sense. Linkshah is a Fire Abundance character, who is actually an Erudition DPS wearing a really convincing disguise. She does everything you would want of a healer. She keeps your party HP high, cleanses debuffs, and even has an ultimate that increases break damage taken by a good amount. So what makes her special then? Well, she has a follow-up attack. I know this may not seem like much since Aventurine did it first, and realistically they work similarly. Aventurine will continue to stack shields when he hits his follow-up, and Linkshah will heal with hers. They both serve the same purpose, but just work a bit differently. What makes Linkshah unique is just how powerful her follow-up attack makes her in the break meta. We'll touch on Aventurine later, but quite simply, he is not capable of doing what Linkshah can in regards to damage. That is thanks partially to how good Super Break is, but also how well Linkshah's kit is designed to do damage. With the inclusion of Fugue in the game, players running Linkshah break teams have actually gone up, and things work well with her at the helm. She is more capable of dealing with a vast amount of enemies than someone like Boothill or maybe even Firefly, only being beaten out truly by the true Erudition DPS that is Rappa. While obviously Linkshah is still more wanted as a healer, running her with Firefly and Fugue can make her your perfect sub-DPS without having to sacrifice the slot. This is all without mentioning that because of her follow-up strength, people also run her as a crit DPS to be paired with Fei Xiao. She will always generate stacks for Fei Xiao and will still ensure the team stays healthy at all times. I think many of the characters in this video are a bit more interesting to discuss, but this really is a prime example of players creating something entirely new out of an existing character. We'll talk more about how players created hybrid characters soon, but now I want to touch on characters who I feel were designed to be hybrids. Characters meant to be unique and break the mold of their paths. I'm of course talking about none other than the IPC. When looking at the IPC characters, all three of them don't follow their traditional archetypes. With Jade essentially being the main influence for Topaz and Aventurine for a lot of their lives, it makes sense that they would end up adopting part of who she is into them. At least, that's how I like to think about it lore-wise, to validate the absolute bullshit that these two are capable of. Let's start with the first of the IPC trio to be released, Topaz. Topaz was a Fire Hunt character who was released in version 1.4. Wow, that's a little after I started playing, and man, that was over a year and a half ago at this point. Jesus. Anyway, Hunt characters looked a lot different than they look nowadays. The Hunt characters at this point in time were characters like Dan Heng, Zila, Yanqing, and Su Shang, who noticeably all suck. Hunt characters are probably the characters who have aged the worst in this game so far. They were built for single target combat exclusively, which means they struggled as Star Rail added more enemies into most battles, and made enemies who were harder to kill or had more resistances. So what makes Topaz different, I hear you asking? Well, in reality, she's actually a single target attacker herself. What deviates her from the norm is the existence of her follow-up attack. As we see today, this is the staple for hunt characters now, and Topaz mostly served as the blueprint for it. Yanqing technically has a follow-up attack, but that move is so trash I really don't even want to talk about it. Topaz mixed the style of a traditional DPS who relied on crit rate and crit damage with that of erudition characters. Obviously, there was characters like Blade and Clara who had follow-up attacks as well, but the consistency with which it happened was far more similar to that of an erudition at the time. Numbi is on a constant timer that can be advanced by attacking with Topaz. This would be similar to Himiko and Xingshui, or even Jingyuan since his Lightning Lord was also on a timer. He just couldn't advance it, the poor old man. Saying Topaz was the innovator of follow-up attacks is definitely wrong, and I know that, but this is when it felt like Star Rail started to truly understand how they're supposed to work, and how to implement them instead of just using a counter character like Clara. Himiko being tied to break, and Herta being tied to HP are fine I suppose, but can still be inefficient. This way of having Topaz and her allies constantly deal damage as follow-ups to trigger even more follow-ups, this just makes so much more sense, and as we can all see, it works wonders in terms of actual gameplay. The hybrid style Topaz contributed to is probably the best one in Star Rail considering just how many hunt characters are now follow-up units instead of just one-on-one damage dealers. The main exception nowadays is Boothill, who is a break DPS, which that in itself is completely different from the original Hunt characters as well. All I can say is, good job Topaz, you really helped set Hunt straight. Next up is Aventurine, and I will be making this one a bit quicker since I've already had to talk about him so much for other videos. Much like Topaz, Aventurine also learned the art of follow-up attacks from Jade. He was the first sustain to have a good follow-up attack while also being an incredible defender. There was other sustains beforehand who were definitely meant to enhance your offense, but Aventurine simply brings this to a completely different level. With his follow-up attack and high crit rate, he is perfectly capable of outputting additional damage for your team. This also comes alongside his ultimate, which places a debuff on an enemy, increasing crit damage taken for multiple turns. Quite simply, he is an offensive-minded sustain character who is also still incredible at sustaining. We can already see this type of hybrid continuing onward with the next sustain we had, Ling Sha, who I already talked about. While Star Rail was probably already planning to shift their thinking on these characters, that doesn't change the fact Aventurine was the first premium character to feature this new style, while also excelling at it. I've already made a whole video about sustains and what their role has become, but I will say it again. This new style of healer is more than welcome in my opinion. It's unique, allows for more fun strategy in teams, and really, since it's already suggested you get a good sustain, might as well get something even better out of it. With the two apprentices out of the way now, let's move on to the woman who taught them, Jade. And realistically, she's actually the least hybrid out of these units. She's an erudition DPS who, shockingly, had a focus on follow-up attacks. This is the normal formula for these types of characters, so you might be asking, what makes Jade unique? Well, her skill is what deviates her from the normal follow-up. She's essentially a hybrid harmony character? Let me explain. Jade has a skill that instead of attacking, places a buff on a teammate. In exchange for a small donation of HP, the so-called deck collector gains an increase to their overall damage. This also contributes to Jade's stacks for her follow-up, with every time the deck collector attacks, Jade will gain stacks for her follow-up. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Obviously March works a bit different, but surely you can see the resemblance. With follow-up characters having become so much more popular and constant, Star Rail has found a lot of ways to keep the archetype unique, and this is something that works extremely well. The effect of a skill being placed can consistently change based on the character and path, which means I can see this design style sticking around for a long time without getting stale. With the IPC out of the way, I want to talk about how much I enjoy what they deliberately did with this group of characters. The IPC specifically being this strange set of characters who didn't really adhere to traditional standards of their path is a really cool concept, especially with the reveal of Jade being erudition, which was the main follow-up path for so long. Again, I absolutely love it lore-wise, and with Jade also being a hybrid character herself, it maintains the trend perfectly. Regardless of how you feel about the IPC characters, I really hope everyone can agree this is a really neat concept that I hope can continue on for specifically IPC characters if nothing else. So now that we have the IPC gang knocked out, we can move on to Star Rail's most interesting experiment. A character who was so ahead of their time that the support just wasn't there for them. with a very cool aesthetic and a sharp weapon to boot, let's finally talk about Blade. Yeah! Okay, real quick. Blade was a big experiment for Star Rail, and he was actually a hybrid character in his own sense, but with how poorly the concept around him was designed and how it's getting to be expanded on, Blade will definitely end up getting talked about on a different list, for a far worse reason. Zhuyi, on the other hand, while still peculiar, is this strange preamble in my mind to another character everyone ended up loving, Boothill. Zhuyi is a destruction character who focuses on being a crit DPS. Wait, no. Actually, she focuses on being a break DPS and her damage even scales off of it. Actually, wait, what? Wait, no, she's both? Yep, she's both apparently. Zhuyi was built as a true hybrid. You want as much break effect as possible with her, but remember, this was before any form of super break existed. So that means she was working exclusively with traditional break teams featuring characters like Bronya and Pela. Star Rail decided since the meta for break wasn't that developed yet, Zhuyi would have a trace that would make her attack scale off of her break effect. This meant building her for crit damage was still ideal, while stacking as much break effect as possible since that would make up for her lacking attack. The ideal Zhuyi style would be to break the enemy to get all that extra damage. Keep in mind as well, Quantum Break is extremely strong. And then Zhuyi could continue the relentless assault with her high crit damage output. Zhuyi's design is truly something insane, honestly, when examining it closer, because even with everything I just mentioned, did you know she's also a follow-up unit? Yes, Zhuyi can collect stacks of karma, and when she has enough, she will fire off a follow-up that will do about 270% of her attack. She gains these stacks every time enemy toughness is reduced, a concept that definitely deviates from some of the other follow-up conditions in the game even now, much less back in the early days. She not only has a more consistent follow-up than whatever the hell Blade is working with, a focus on break, which was very uncommon at this point, all while still needing the conventional stats of a crit DPS. Zhuyi is the most melting pot character in this entire game, and it's not even close, my lord. This, folks, is the true definition of a hybrid. Now, if only it worked. Zhuyi, while an incredibly fun unit on paper, has some deficiencies naturally. First of all, she's a 4-star, which means the power level is just naturally lower than other characters. Second, by giving her so much, it also makes her incredibly difficult to build around. Having a high crit stat and a high break stat is far from easy, and you'll probably need to rely on other characters like a Ron Mei to get you the max break effect stat Zhuyi needs, which is about 240%. Her follow-up is the part of the kit you need to worry about the least since it will just happen while achieving her break effect. But this is also not the best thing to build around since her break is going to make up most of her damage combined with this follow-up attack. Not to mention that with the exceeding amount of break-related characters in the game currently, using Zhuyi for that break damage is just smarter. Zhuyi is a case of Star Rail wanting to experiment and finding some fun concepts through her, but not quite hitting it out of the park on the first try. Her investment is astronomically high for a return that will still ultimately be worse than a good Firefly. She still brings a lot of uniqueness to the table and highlights the amazing combinations that Star Rail hybrid units have and are capable of. If you have an E6 Zhuyi lying around, I would highly recommend trying her out at some point. My old roommate loved her, and I myself have used her in Divergent Universe, and it's been pretty fun. Also, she's meant to pair pretty well with Fugue, so if that sounds fun to you, then knock yourself out. We'll now move on to a character who I have a bit less to talk about rather than the absolute confusion that is Himiko, the other leader of the Astral Express, Welt. So, how is Welt a hybrid, you might ask? He seems like a standard Nihility character, and while slow isn't great as a DOT, he can still do respectable damage as a DPS, right? Well, yes, but no. Welt is technically fine as a DPS, and if you want to see a video that can really demonstrate the potential of Welt, Moon has a great video on her channel that I personally liked a lot as a big Welt fan. He's a very unique character, and his skill is capable of pumping out an insane amount of damage alongside his powerful ultimate. Unfortunately, specifically as a Nihility unit, he falls a little flat. Slow is the main thing gained from Welt besides raw damage, and while that can be helpful, yes, think about how DOT works. Without Kafka to detonate them, debuffs don't do their damage until the enemy moves again. For something like Memory of Chaos, or any of the turn-based modes really, slowing them so that they don't get a turn that cycle means you'll lose out on a great deal of damage gained from your other DOT units. It is quite literally the antithesis of what you want to be doing as an agility player. In this way, Welt has already defied his expectations since he is legit better as a normal DPS now rather than focusing on effect hit rate and having a bit more lacking crit stats. If we're being technical here, this already makes him into the hybrid DPS role, but now we can talk about the real thing you're here for. Sustain a Welt, baby! Woo! God. So remember how Welt's whole thing is slowing enemies? Pretty bad for other DOT, yeah? But great for traditional DPS who don't want enemies to have a turn. He can't heal, yes, but if he slows the enemies to a crawl so your team can absolutely devastate them before they move, does it really matter? Well, this is definitely a strategy that's a lot more talked about than actually used in my experience. There are a lot of people who have still done it, have actively encouraged it, and proven it to be an actual sustainable strategy for people going for 0 cycles or who have very, very high level DPS builds. This is probably the most insane thing I've ever seen, if I'm being honest. Star Rail players turned a dude who was meant to be a DPS, always intended to be a DPS with just a weird gimmick, into a sustain. Incredible. While I wouldn't recommend this for the majority of players, if you feel confident in yourself and your builds and want to try something funky, this is definitely something for you. I appreciate that instead of Star Rail making the hybrid character, it's the players who turned Welt into a hybrid, finding his strength in a spot where the creators just didn't think of, I assume. Now that we have all the IPC out of the way, we have one of the biggest hybrid characters ever, Zhuyi done, and even Welt Sustain wrapped up, as well as Lingsha Super Break, we can talk about our final character of the day. Our last character today is none other than Himiko. Himiko was an erudition character who has been here since the very beginning of the game, and somehow, she has only gotten better over time. In a world where Yanqing is trash, Bailu and Japart are mid, Bronya keeps getting replaced, and Welt is usually okay at best, Himiko has managed to actually see even more play over time. Clara is also good, but this isn't about her. Sorry, Clara. Himiko was initially made as a crit DPS who focused on follow-up attacks. Her follow-up condition was, unfortunately, a bit difficult. She needs enemies to be broken 3 times before her follow-up goes off. Pretty easy by today's standards with all of the Foxian Prayer, Firefly, Fire Implant, and straight-up toughness reduction that exists, but those only came into existence relatively recently. If enemies just weren't fire weak, you would need your other characters to be able to break their weakness. If they couldn't, Himiko lost out on most of her usefulness. This was a pretty isolated case though. It isn't too hard to break enemy weakness if you pay attention to what you need. Himiko was able to carry on this job for a while just fine, but over time, old characters get weaker and weaker, and Himiko fell out of the limelight. It wasn't until Pure Fiction came out that she finally saw some true relevance again. She is simply incredible in it because of the pure amount of follow-ups her and Herta are capable of when working together. This was still the extent of her usefulness though. You had to be insane to use her in other cases over characters like Ratio, Jingliu, and Acheron. This is where the hybrid part comes in though. Himiko has gone from an okay crit damage DPS to one of the best break characters in the game. The introduction of Super Break suddenly made her kit make so much sense. She was built perfectly for it without the designers even intending on it. You're seeing in the back here, Break Himiko absolutely decimate enemies, and it is hilarious. Star Rail also knew how much people were loving it, because guess what? An erudition cone focused specifically on Break was added to the game when Jade came out. Jade does not need Break. No other erudition character needed Break at this point. I feel this was 100% done for players who loved using Break Himiko, and it was wonderful to see Star Rail give players what they wanted to further enhance this new version of their character. Break Himiko is one of the most interesting cases in the game, truthfully. For such an old character to still see relevance in such a unique way is shocking, and especially in a way that I feel wasn't intended for her to begin with. Super Break was obviously made with Firefly and Rappa in mind. Zhuyi benefited as well, and now players could try to convert other characters to Break DPS if they wanted. Despite her not being thought of for this at all, Himiko is one of the characters to benefit the most from Super Break and Fugue specifically, finally giving her the ability to break anything on her own. It is wild to see, but after finally doing it myself, Break Himiko is legit, and it is something I feel like everyone should try if they can. It breathes new life into this character, and has finally given me the chance to use her consistently like I've always wanted. Hybrid characters in Star Rail are a strange thing for sure, but in just about every case, they're still really good while balancing the different archetypes that they're based off of. For characters like Welt and Himiko, to see new uses again is awesome. The IPC all being unique combinations is something I hope continues. And Shui, yeah, Jesus, that girl is a mess, but she's awesome at least, so hey, you know, points Shui. These characters are a good representation of creativity of both the designers and the community, and continue to give me hope that this game will continue to be innovative and fun with their characters for years to come. And really, that's all I can ask for. Thank you everybody so much for watching. Also, I didn't mention Ling Sha in that last little bit, but yeah, Ling Sha's cool too. I really love Ling Sha. This script was a little jumbled, but it was something I was really excited to talk about after making Break Himiko myself, so I wanted to write it as fast as I could so I could get started. Did I get it out in time? Haha, no! This was written in 2.6. Jesus! As always, I am curious to hear your thoughts. Who's your favorite weird experiment from Star Rail, or do you have any characters you've tried and used in a completely different way that ended up working out well? Leave a comment down below with any thoughts. I'm excited to see what you guys have to say like always. With that said, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys for the next video. Bye-bye! So, you thought I would never follow up on this video, huh? You thought I would forget, huh? Since I made my first video about hybrid units, HSR has seen a plethora of new characters added to the game. Many of these characters have had truly unique designs, but still fall into just one role. There are those few characters though who reach even higher. They transcend their traditional path and become a force unlike anything else in this game. These are hybrid characters, and today, I'll be talking about the ones added since my last video last year. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, join our Discord down below, become a YouTube member today, and let's get into it. Since my last video on the subject, hybrid characters have become, a lot more common nowadays. I went from struggling to find even 5 characters to having to debate how much I wanted to cut the list this time around. If that's not a glow up, I don't know what is. Many of these characters, while being hybrids, also have some of the most unique designs in the entire game, which simply adds another factor to love about these unique units. Almost all of our units today come from Amphorius, really highlighting the progression of HSR. Many characters are still very much meant to fill in one spot and that's it, but we've seen even those characters get kits that allow them to be more flexible in what they do and where they appear. I very much love the path the game has been on, at least in terms of unique kits, so I'm excited to finally start talking about them. Without further ado, let's get into our first character of the day. You know her, and though you may not love her, she's one of the best supports in HSR right now. Let's talk about Tribby. Tribby is a Quantum Harmony 5-star released in version 3.1. As a Harmony character, she offers fantastic buffs to your team, unique utility with a fast-acting ultimate, and nuclear warfare. Wait, what? On top of increasing ally damage, which is what Harmony is known for, she also increases damage taken by enemies, something not quite as commonplace for Harmony characters. You know what else isn't commonplace for Harmony characters? Dealing more damage than your main DPS. And yet, there's a reason Tribby is on this list. Tribby has a damage level that is comparable to a 4-star DPS. To have that as a Harmony character is unbelievable. You would think this means some of her buffs or advantages get sacrificed, but no. Quite literally, not at all. Tribby offers a 24% res pen zone to allies, which is something often reserved for like an E6 DPS Eidolon, and she can increase damage taken by a flat 30% while her ult is up. For reference, that's comparable to the Nihility character Zhao Cho, and only 10% off of Cypher's vulnerability amp. Is that not insane to hear out loud? When's the last time anyone properly took a minute to process just how much of an enigma Tribby is? Not just as a powerful character, but also in how she as a character is constructed. Would you like to know, in the Harmony roster, who else can buff a teammate while also specifically making enemies take more damage? Which, by the way, this is something often reserved for Nihility kits rather than Harmony kits. The answer to my question? 1. The only other character I could find who could do this at Triby's release was Hanya. That says a lot about the enigma that is Hanya, but much more so about how special Triby is. Going back to the Harmony versus Nihility debate, that reasoning is part of what makes Triby so unique and interesting to me. I've discussed this many times, but Nihility is the path that tears enemies down. That's what all the characters do with their different debuffs. This stands in a direct contrast to Harmony, often uplifting allies to make them stronger. Sunday, Robin, Ron Mei, Ting Yun, they all increase the strength of allies. For Triby to do both is honestly really interesting to me, and I found it very strange at the time of release. This is something I feel most other people wouldn't focus on or care about, but I personally just find that design choice really interesting to this day. This definitely stands out as the biggest aspect of Triby being a hybrid character, as long as you ignore the, well, you know. Her damage dealing capabilities basically replacing that of a sub DPS is genuinely remarkable, and it's not comparable to any other character that came before her. Add in her unique energy situation, being able to be the best user of the broken light cone dance, and we have a character unlike any other in Star Rail. The next character today is going to be one I have covered constantly, to the point I don't really want to talk about him anymore, but this is my job and I'm gonna do it. So say hello to the next hybrid character on the list, Nexa. Now some of you might be asking, well, how is Nexa a hybrid character? He's just a DPS that does damage, right? Right you are, viewer. He is in fact just a DPS. However, he's no normal DPS. The way Nexa has been constructed is simply mind-boggling at this point. How they intended this character to be and what he became are so far separate, I can't even process it. Nexa is a Wind Erudition 5-star, released in version 3.2. He was on the same patch as Castris, so as a result of that, was heavily overlooked by most non-Madame Herta players. At the end of the day though, this was not a character to overlook. Meant to be a sub DPS for Herta, Nexa immediately exceeded all expectations, and genuinely serves better as a main DPS than a sub DPS. This isn't to say he's bad as a sub DPS though. He still has immense value and is probably the best option overall. The fact of the matter is, his value as a main DPS is that much higher than as a sub DPS. Nexa is a hybrid character because of that ability to become one of the most versatile characters in Honkai Star Rail. You want him to be your main DPS? You have multiple builds and options for that. You want him to be a sub DPS? Slap Eagle set on and watch him go. You want a break character? He can do that. You want a debuffer? He can do that too. This kit is simply insane in every single category. I would go as far to say that there is no character in HSR who can do what Nexa does. His kit is jam-packed and you feel every part of it no matter how you use him. He's capable of shredding enemy defense up to 28% entirely on his own. That is not normal. Most characters need Eidolons, light cones, or even other teammates to achieve that, but for Nexa, he does it all by himself. This is without even talking about his ultimate, Sprouting Life Sculpts Earth. This will halt enemies in their tracks if they have no control res, allowing you to even interrupt bosses with multiple actions. You get all of this while Nexa is also one of the best damage dealers in HSR with his skill being Bounce, meaning single targets get decimated by it. All in all, Nexa stands as just something unusual. He has a mechanic similar to Ron Mei delaying enemies, an insane amount of defense shred built into his kit, and a higher damage output than the character he's made as a support for. All the while, possessing the flexibility to be any sort of DPS you want him to be. This may not seem as hybrid to some of you watching, but go try this with the Herta, Aglaya, or Acheron and get back to me. Trust me, this is easily one of the best designs and most unique designs in HSR. Let's now move on to our next character. Do you all remember the inclusion of Lingsha and Avon on the last list? Well, somehow, we've reached the next stage in the evolution of that character archetype. Allow me to introduce you to Hyacin, arguably the most broken character in HSR. If you thought the other DPS sustains were bad, you know nothing of what true terror looks like. I have seen Hyacin consistently deal upwards of 300,000 damage. This is while at the same time, your whole team is at full HP! This, viewer, is what the devil personified looks like. That pretty pink hair, the cutesy dress, the adorable fat creature, all lies, and deceit. This is the true face of terror, and there is no hope for survival. Anyway, let's actually talk about Hyacin. Hyacin is a Win Remembrance character released in version 3.3. As previously described, she fits in the mold of the DPS Sustain hybrid, possessing incredible sustain capabilities and being able to dish out heavy damage all in one package. A funny note while researching this video, Hyacin's kit only mentions damage twice. This is because in the two character combo of Hyacin and Ika is the one doing all the damage. This is pretty different from Ling Sha, who has her basic attack, ult, and skill all do damage by her own hands. Her summon also will do damage upon use similar to Ika. My silly tangent aside, Hyacin's kit focuses entirely on heavily sustaining the party at all times. Her ult will increase the max HP of all characters on the team, and her skill heals the entire party and Ika if already summoned. Every time the team has their HP restored, little Ika does more damage, stacking up to 3 times. The max damage number from this talent, you ask? 240%. Little Ika also scales off of how much healing is done, using 20% of that tally to determine initial damage. This is a character combo unlike any other. Aventurine as a character had his damage linked to his sustainability. The better he sustained, the more damage he could consistently do. Hyacin takes this formula and pushes past its limits. Instead, the more sustaining Hyacin does, the stronger the attacks get, with just as much consistency as Aventurine. The damage potential is simply higher with no downside really. This isn't simply a hybrid character, but one of the most insane designs I've seen in a game. Just like Tribi, this is a character who can greatly outdamage true DPS characters. And I haven't even touched on her Eidolons yet. Hyacin has an Eidolon that will actually give her increased crit damage for every speed over 200 that she has. Pairing with an earlier Eidolon that gives a bonus 30% speed, players would get, at minimum, an additional 60% crit damage. Yeah, Hyacin represents what I hope is the final evolution of the Sustain DPS hybrid. Mainly because, if she isn't the final evolution, I shudder to think about what comes next. Speaking of shuddering at what's next, say hello to a meta player's nightmare. The character-specific, damage-dealing support, Cyrene. Cyrene is the same support style as Tribi, having some powerful buffs and even better damage-dealing capabilities. Man, they really like that archetype in Amphorius, huh? Anyway, Cyrene starts out strong, with buffs very few characters have and a far more accessible way to use them. Upon using skill, Cyrene casts a true damage zone. This zone increases your damage immensely and is more accessible than any other form of true damage. Her hybrid capabilities start after the first use of her ult. She gains an enhanced attack, outputting a fair amount of damage. This, on top of her powerful true damage zone, really helps shred a lot of enemies. Her ult is a big factor in this hybrid capability too. Her ult is a massive AoE blast, often dealing upwards of 250k damage. Yes, it's a slow ult, but that much damage is nice regardless, and it won't be too hard to charge in Optimal Team specifically. Cyrene overall is just a strange character. She possesses a permanent memo sprite, which isn't uncommon, but what is unique is that her memo sprite acts more like a summon. You can't target or kill it like you can with other memo sprites, but you can't target it either as an ally. Instead, only Cyrene on the ground can be influenced by what goes on in your team. This design is completely unique to her, and is something I doubt we'll see in Remembrance characters going forward. Since any character of any path can have a summon, giving a memo the same functioning as one while still being on a Remembrance character is really odd, to say the least. I wish I could explain it better than this or offer some more insight, but unfortunately, I can't. Cyrene and the whole of 3.7 were a bit buggy overall because of this unique design as well, which makes how this came to be even more perplexing. A support who has the power to do massive damage with a memo sprite that acts like a summon. She's a hybrid character for sure, but more than that, Cyrene is one of the most unique characters in HSR history. All of this without factoring in, she takes the unique trait of emanators. They require specific characters to be at their strongest, and so does Cyrene. Instead of it just being a path, however, she can make full use of any Chrysos Heir character. A fun change of pace that really does add to the lore of the character, and can be a fun addition going into the future. No matter how you feel about Cyrene, saying she's one of the more unique characters in this game is definitely true. Alright, so just to mix things up, since obviously every new character recently has been from Amphoreus, let's take some time to discuss one of the buffed characters we had this update. Which buffed character could possibly be considered a hybrid, you ask? Well, Blade used to be a big example of one, but nowadays, he's mainly just an HP unit with counter capabilities. Still heavily unique, considering he has an enhanced basic attack and a consistent counter, which is something that basically no other counter character has, but we'll move on from him to talk about a truly interesting case. I'm talking about none other than the front woman of the Stellaron Hunters, Kafka. How is Kafka a hybrid, you may be asking? Well, probably not at this point. I imagine you know I'm gonna explain it to you. But if you are specifically asking, let me explain. Kafka is a Lightning Nihility character, released in version 1.2 and buffed in version 3.4. She stands as one of the most unique characters in HSR, detonating damage over time abilities that normally only activate on enemy turns. This is already huge and made her essential to any good DOT team. Her changes, however, put her in a far more interesting spot as a character. The important thing about Kafka is that her damage has always been poor without other DOT characters. She relied heavily on Sampo, Black Swan, and now Hysilenskisser to really get anything done. Ever since her buffs, her personal damage now matters less than ever before. That sounds weird when you see a Kafka skill do 300,000 damage, but that's not actually her damage. An often misunderstood concept about DOT and Kafka is how the damage works. As mentioned earlier, when an enemy moves, that's when they take DOT damage. This damage is pretty powerful, but having it come up so rarely is a serious problem. This is how Kafka and detonation works. Every time Kafka does a follow-up, skill, or ultimate, DOT damage is detonated. This is not Kafka's damage, but rather the collective DOT damage from your other characters. That still makes Kafka absolutely essential to the team, opening up the potential for that much more damage, but it's not fair to call her the DPS either. Kafka is best described as an engine. She powers DOT to work to the best of its ability, detonating damage and enhancing allies. This is where she claims the role of a hybrid character. She helps with damage, yes, but in such an interesting way, and her new buffs actually give her some support tendencies. She has a trace that increases ally attack when they have over 75% effect hit rate, which every good DOT ally has. This is a massive boost, and allows you to go without running another support like Robin or Ron May. Instead, Kafka has you covered in terms of a raw power increase. These changes push Kafka into something very unique, and unseen in my opinion. She is the most responsible for the party's damage, while in actuality, she has very little influence over it. She also has a support capability, while everything about her is damaging. If this doesn't sound like a hybrid character to you, I do not know what is. We now arrive at the last character I want to talk about today. There were a few others who could have been considered, but I don't get to talk about this guy much. As a result, I'm including him regardless. Let's end today with the bringer of the dawn, Finon. Now, Finon is not really a normal hybrid character. He is in fact just a very powerful DPS. It isn't like a Nexa either, where he's incredibly versatile and can be molded to the situation. No, Finon is the situation. He is the center point of every fight, and serves only to be a true hyper carry. Where his hybrid element comes from, in my opinion, is from his ultimate. This is going to be a reach, but I want to talk about this and get it out there. Finon is a transformation character who gains a new form and abilities when he uses his ult. The ability I want to talk about is the middle ability, which is a counter. Let me say, this is the best counter character in the game. Not Finon, no. This singular move. This is better than the entirety of Yunli and Clara's kits, and it's not even close. Upon using this ability, Finon will action advance all enemies to attack him. He will block every hit, and when it goes back to his turn, he will unleash his attack, dealing massive damage to all enemies, gaining power for every time he was attacked. I do feel his moveset is a great hybrid of many things, having a unique kit that is adaptable to most situations. He can succeed in AoE, single target, and just about anything in between. He also encourages a sustainless style, but can also utilize a sustain considering how he gains his core flame stacks. Finon possesses many interesting qualities that make up the character that he is. But I did in fact put him on this list because he somehow merges being a hypercarry DPS perfectly with that of a counter DPS. And he does it better than the other actual options available in the game. That is tragic, to say the least. Honkai Star Rail is a silly game, folks, but I love it all the same. With all that said, that ends our video for today. I last explored this topic so long ago, so getting to look at it again was genuinely so much more fun than I expected. I really hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did, and look forward to a few other concepts coming back to the channel soon. I really enjoy getting to play and talk about this game a lot, and even when it's struggling or not swimming in attention, I'll be sure to still make quality content for you all. Thanks for watching. I got plenty of more good videos coming out soon, so I will see you guys then. Bye bye!